Okay, I really need to find my remote for my camera so I don't have to keep walking back and forth. Okay, anyway. In my videos, I'm going to be using, in my abo or natural material videos, I'm going to be using these types of billets, what I call billets. Now, most modern nappers would call these billets too. But if you look in the archaeological research, a lot of the literature calls these retouchers. Okay, retouchers. Now, retouchers can be anything from an antler tine like this to a large piece of bone or antler like this. They don't really differentiate between the different types like modern nappers do. They will, in conversation, you know, we know what a billet is. Most billets are like this size here. Although I don't use this, I don't use billets like this. I use this mainly for holders for bits. But a lot of modern nappers use billets of this size, okay, to do their napping, and they often back their workpiece with either their hand or knee or leg or something while they're striking. You know, Paleo Man Jim also has a couple videos where he uses a separate stone, where he sandwiches the workpiece between a stone and his leg and then uses a billet that way. There is a lot of variation there. But anyway, what I'm getting at is the terminology that is used in the literature. Especially with Europeans, I think they use retoucher, the terminology retoucher. And it can be anything, even a stone can be called a retoucher. And I think one of the latest papers that I was reading mentioned pebble retouchers, river cobbles or river pebbles used for hammerstones. They call these pebble retouchers. Okay, now when we get into the archaeology in the U.S. and flint-knapping terminology in the U.S., it gets kind of confusing, and there's not really many terms to describe the different tools. Most people just say, okay, pressure flaker and billet, and that's pretty much what we use, pressure flaker and billet. This is a billet here. It's pretty recognizable, but I don't typically use these types of billets. I made these in the beginning when I first started napping because everyone else was using those. I typically use this type of retoucher, or what I call a pointed billet. Has two ends on it. One is a rounded end, one is a pointed end. And I use, of course, the antler tines. So the terminology that I'll use, if I don't use the term flaker, like direct percussion flaker or direct pressure flaker, I'll use the terms retoucher or billet. But I'm going to try to get away from using a lot of different terms. I'm going to see if I can focus on a few terms that'll be more easily understandable or consistent. Maybe not understandable, but consistent in my videos. Okay, so and another reason why I use this type of tool is because you can see how maybe in ancient times they would use the tip of a tusk or a broken bone, a large bone that's been broken, and usually it breaks at an angle with a sharp or constricted point on one end, and you can just dull it down and use it as a flaker. Okay, or cut the end off a walrus tusk or a mammoth tusk and use the tip as your percussion tool. Okay, so I'm going to be referring to these as pointed billets, I think, from now on. And I'm going to try to get away from the word retoucher because it's kind of a general, and also flaker is a general term. So those two, retoucher and flaker, I'm going to try to get away from using those and stick with billet and punch, like the horizontal punch or vertical punch. Okay, so and there's also the issue of different types of pressure. Now, I'm going to get into this more with a kind of a lecture type explanation on paper, but just to give you a brief introduction, this small tine here is usually used like a pressure flaker. I mean, how do I explain this? It's usually used in the palm of your hand as a tool to sharpen or to flake on the margin of your workpiece. And in Europe and in European studies, they call this a marginal retouch, where you have just short flakes taken off the edge to dress it up or to shape it or to sharpen it with something small like this. Now, when people discuss longer pressure flakes, they usually just use the term pressure flaker, but I'm going to try to get away from the general term flaker and use what I call a driver instead of a pressure flaker. So there's a punch for indirect percussion. This is a horizontal punch, but it could also be a vertical punch. I'm going to get away from the word drift also. Drift punch. I'm not going to use the word drift at all. So I'm going to use a punch or a driver as far as the difference between percussion. Percussion is punch and pressure is a driver. Okay? Because you can do both retouch or short flakes on the margin or the edge with something like this, or you can drive flakes in even past halfway sometimes with a small flaker like this. So and then there are different ways you can use this too. There's direct or aggressive pressure, where you just snap off flakes in a very consistent, not consistent, but direct manner, where you just snap it off in kind of a controlled fashion, where the passive pressure is you push and hold steady and keep pushing until it releases on its own. That's what I call passive pressure. So there's aggressive pressure, where you just snap off flakes in a predictable way, and then there's the passive, where you wait until it actually detaches. Now with passive pressure, you can usually drive longer flakes than with aggressive pressure, but there are some gray areas there. But I think this is better explained on paper, so I'll do that. But just to give you an idea of the terminology that I'll be using. So just to recap, I'm going to be using punch for percussion and driver for pressure on this, and pointed billet or rounded billet for the direct percussion. And I think that's it for this video. Like I said, I'll go over it in more detail on paper. I think that'd be more useful than try to wing it like this. And okay, that's it.